Welcome to the Qualified Tutor Podcast. Here at QT, our mission is to provide teacher training for tutors. If you are a motivated tutor and you love to learn, the QT Podcast will inspire, motivate, and support you to improve your practice. Because tutoring is a small job that makes a big difference. Hello and welcome to our next instalment of the Qualified Tutor Podcast. Today I'll be speaking to Sophie Parker, a brilliant young tutor and founder of Tutor In A Box, a tutoring company that's changing the game in the field of learning resources. Julia and I met Sophie at the BET 2020 Technology and Education Conference, and we're very, very excited to hear Sophie share her thoughts and experiences from the world of tutoring. Hello, Sophie. How are you?
Hi, lovely to hear from you. Thank you guys for having me on.
That's not a problem. Thank you very, very much for coming on, Sophie. So I thought we'd start today with something that we start with every time, which is, Sophie, what kind of tutor were you? And did you ever have a tutor?
So I was a very good student. I worked very hard, and I was very lucky. I was very academic and worked very hard in school and academically did very well. And I did have a tutor growing up, and I hope he never listens to this, but bless him, he was rather old and a typical what I'd call as a tutor. So a kind of old male, very nice person, but not necessarily the most fun. But he helped me get through and progress in a lot of things, and he helped a lot of my friends as well. Yes, I think I was a very hardworking student, and yes, I had a tutor.
Do you think having this tutor that you had affected the way that you looked at tutoring from your days as a student?
I don't think it did. I don't think I necessarily ever considered being a tutor. He was a teacher, or he was a retired head teacher. So I didn't necessarily see it at the time as being a career and something you could do kind of as a real career and making a job out of it. It was very much seen as something he did kind of once he'd retired, almost as a little bit of pocket money, which works for a lot of people, and that's great. But I think if you want it to, and I've certainly found it can become so much more than that. And it really is possible to make it into a full-time career. Yeah,
no, exactly. And that leads us very nicely on to kind of, Sophie, how did you get into the world of teaching and tutoring?
So my background is maths. So I was a numbers person through and through. So I absolutely loved it at school and college, and I did maths at university. And I remember getting some career advice when I was at school, and she knew I loved maths, and she basically said you can become an accountant or a teacher. And I remember thinking those were quite limited options. And I graduated from uni, and I remember being met with the same advice. Well, you're great at maths, you've got a first-class maths degree, go train to be an accountant or become a maths teacher.
And you thought, thought no.
Absolutely. So to add some context, I have a lot of friends who are accountants. I think they're absolutely wonderful. I'm very much not a desk person, although I did for the first couple of years I did work in London working as a statistical consultant. And it was fine, but it was very much desk based. And so I knew kind of accounting long term wasn't going to be for me. And Dad used to be a teacher. So he put me off from it from day one, and it was never going to be an option. So, I think I'm very lucky I fell into it. And I have always worked with children, always worked with young people. So right from 16, I did lots of work with my local holiday camp. And then as soon as I went to university, I did Camp America every year, and I did au pairing and all sorts of things. And I loved working with young people. But it wasn't ever really seen as a career. And I remember leaving university, and I wanted to work at summer camp for a couple of years after it. And everyone said to me, you've got to go get a proper job. They'll never let you have 3 months off in summer. And it was almost that realization that supposedly the big wide world said I had to stop doing what I loved and working with children and young people. And actually, I had to have some boring jobs. So I'll put a disclaimer. I did it for a couple of years, absolutely hated it. And found my way back through tutoring. I guess as some people do, as they kind of fell into it. As somebody that knew I was good with children and young people and knew I was good at maths. asked me to tutor her daughter. Started off as kind of an hour a week. Before you know it, someone else asked, and it was all through word of mouth. And I was doing it. By the second year, I was working full-time, tutoring in the evening with a full-time job. And so I just kind of, I guess I was very lucky. I kind of fell into it, and it used my skill set. And I realised a little while later that I wanted to do it full-time.
Yeah.
And I totally realised I've gone over my 2 minutes. I do apologise.
That's not the way, finding out the backgrounds of people who tutor now is kind of really one of the main points of these podcasts, these conversations, is so that people who are starting out or people that would like a little bit of guidance on their careers, their futures in tutoring, can understand where other people started, those who are now doing it successfully. If they could share their thoughts on how they started. So what do you think the kind of top 3 tips that you'd give now to younger tutors who are starting out? What kind of tips would you give them if you were in their shoes?
I think my first would be, don't be afraid to try something new. And I think with that, a lot of people say tutoring is not a proper job, or maybe you can't make a career out of it or anything like that. And I very much have. And I know you'll probably be interviewing loads and loads of other people who have done the same thing. If it's something you enjoy, wherever you're coming from, whether it's a background as a teacher or straight out of university, or whether it's from a corporate job in finance, whatever it is, if it's something you're interested in, don't be afraid to try it out and actually see where it leads to you. I think initially people can be put off by the fact it's not necessarily got that same support and infrastructure that maybe some careers have. So people think it won't work or it can't work. So my number 1 tip would be, don't be afraid to try it, and don't be afraid to start tutoring and see where it takes you. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And I think taking the plunge for sure is a really key part to tutoring, because as you said, you can make something out of it if you really go for it. I guess with lots of kind of we talk about small business ideas. Julia mentioned in our first conversation that tutors are a kind of small business. They are their own self-employed business, and even though that's on a much smaller scale than you might picture when you talk about small businesses, you are selling yourself, you are selling your product. So having the confidence to really just go for it is really half the battle at the beginning, and that's why I'm so very impressed by you, Sophie, for Tutor In A Box, which when we spoke to you at the vet, I could not believe the enthusiasm and the passion that you had for it, which really was very very amazing to see, and which kind of is maybe I've answered my own question here, but Sophie, what do you enjoy most about tutoring? Why do you tutor? So for me, I absolutely love tutoring because I make a difference. And for me, that is a really, really fundamental part of it. I think the biggest thing is being able to help somebody and see that light bulb moment. And actually, if I've got a student who is disengaged, not enjoying school, or needs some extra support, and they actually get it in half an hour, 40 minutes with me, it is amazing to see. And I guess I get a huge sense of satisfaction from that. And it totally makes everything so worthwhile. At the end of at the end of all my lessons, I get students to do 2 things. I get them a sticky note, and I get them to write down one thing they've learned and one thing they're proud of. And this is something that's just evolved from kind of how I work and what I do. And I think it's really important to reflect on the lesson and kind of boost people's self-esteem and confidence in that subject. So get them to write something they've learned and something they're proud of. And it is so lovely when students write down, and they frequently do, I've learned about, algebra, and I never thought I could understand it. Or I've learned about sectors of circles, and we've done 3 lessons and it was class and I didn't understand it at all. Or I thought completing the square was the worst thing ever and I hated it, and now I can do all the questions correctly. And seeing that and being able to have that impact, I guess, for me, is absolutely lovely and absolutely wonderful. And I feel very lucky to be able to do that. Yeah. Okay. So making a difference is the kind of the reward that you take from it.
I think that's something that really resonates with lots of tutors. Yeah. How do you see that, apart from kind of at the end of sessions, are there ways that you measure the difference that you're making with your students, maybe a little bit longer term?
Yeah, so I think feedback's really important, and I think actually measuring in KPIs and things like that are also really important. And it's very much as I start to become more, I guess, business minded rather than tutor minded, it's definitely something I am doing more work on. So you're absolutely right, understanding where students are at the beginning and where they're at the end. Test scores, where they're at the beginning, where they're at the end, things like that. And I get a lot of feedback from parents. I think feedback's very, very important. So I regularly check in on parents and find out how they're doing at school, what the latest parents' evening has said, what their test results were, and things like that. And I think that they give you a very, very good indication of how that student is performing.
Yeah. Which is really a very important part of tutoring. Is you are, for some jobs, you are supplementing the work that they're doing at school, and this could often be because they are struggling in the classroom environment. So you need to know if what you're doing is improving their performance. And sometimes it can be easy for tutors, I think, just to kind of do their sessions, end their sessions, go home, and not take into account that they have a duty to measure the students' progress. That's something that you've kind of noticed, is it, Sophie?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I'm very aware that it's very important to be in sync with teachers and parents. And you speak to any tutor and they'll have views on teachers, and you'll speak to any teacher and they'll have views on tutors. And some teachers think we're great and we help them, and some, unfortunately, think we're a big threat. But actually, if I know what a teacher's covered at school, and I don't know, I have a scheme of work or a frame or something like that, then that allows me to support them in a much better way, in a much more detailed way. So recently I had a student who was attending, obviously, their lessons at school, but their maths teacher was off sick quite a bit. So they were getting quite a lot of substitutes. And I had a kind of a plan of what they were supposed to be covering from the school and from the teacher, and they had a kind of an end of term mock test.
Yeah.
And so most of the class kind of got 60, 70%. It's a good school, but obviously there were quite significant gaps where the teacher hadn't taught things because they'd been ill, or there were substitutes that hadn't been taught, or whatever. And one of my students came back to me, and she literally had the biggest grin ever on her face one evening. She's got her test results back from school, and compared with the class who's got kind of 60, maybe maximum 70%, she'd got 94%. And she was just over the moon. And that was just because I'd worked with her school and with the teachers to understand what they were teaching at school, highlighting the kind of gaps in terms of where the teacher couldn't teach, wasn't teaching, or whatever, because they were ill, away, too busy, whatever, and actually helping support her with those gaps, which was fabulous. Yeah.
So do you think maybe that's what you see as the point of view as a teacher tutor, is to just kind of improve those small gains to fill those gaps in knowledge?
I do, and I do also think that kind of as a teacher, tutor, and whatever, educator, that we actually have a much bigger role than just knowledge. So actually, one of my top tips, I guess my second top tip, going back to that, would be know your USP, be unique, know what you're about, and know what's important to you. So for me, one of the really important things, it's not just about education, but it's about enjoying education. And so very much all of what we do is about making people feel good about education. So yes, it's important to plug those gaps and help them with the knowledge, but actually for me, it's far more important to do that in a fun, engaging and interactive way that's hands-on. And I'm not just about teaching them the content, and so students will come to me and I'm not just about giving them a sheet and saying, learn this, do this, whatever. It's all about having a go, using pipe cleaners, using snack cards, using Lego. There's a huge variety of different things we use, and I think it's really important to be aware of what you offer, as well as just kind of teaching the subject.
And just some tips for young maths tutors. Are there any really, really good techniques, tactics, exercises you've used for younger students with maths specifically.
How long have you got?
And how much will you pay me?
Yeah. I think there are a huge range of tips, resources, anything like that. I'm a big believer in collaboration, not competition. And in the maths community, there is so much fabulous stuff out there. There's some fantastic websites like Corbett Maths, Pixie Maths, Maths Genie, Resourceaholic, Mr. Barton Maths, so many resources and websites with blogs, with answers, with printed resources, with games, with activities, from teachers as well as tutors. So I think there's not one tip or exercise per se I would say to use, but I'd really say we're very fortunate that in the maths community there are lots of resources out there, and so spend some time looking through them, read what other people do and what they've been successful with and what works for them.
Okay, so to kind of do your research. I think that's resources are a huge, well, two things. They're an enormous part of the tutoring session. Obviously, the resources that you bring, and whether that takes the form of kind of worksheets or more fun, enjoyable, different alternative ways of capitalizing on resources, but also kind of one of the main, when we've talked to young tutors in the kind of the webinars at the BET conference with colleagues of ours, we noticed that accessing resources can really be one of the most time-consuming elements of tutoring. And actually, tutors are feeling that they're not necessarily being so efficient because they spend, although they get paid for the hour of tutoring they spend too much time gathering resources. Have you found there's somewhere that you have been able to kind of collate resources, or how do you gather resources, Sophie?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point, and I think it's a very interesting one. Yes, understandably, you are kind of paid per hour, as it were, to tutor, and so the resources are outside of that. However, I think as long as you know where to look for resources, then they shouldn't need to be too time-consuming. And I think, like anything, when you start something, it takes you far longer than once you're kind of an experienced pro in it, as it were. And I've obviously still got a long way to go, but it's definitely taking me much less time now to find the resources I want than when I was at the very beginning, when I had no idea where to look. So I think some of that does come with time. I think I'm also in the fortunate position now where I create a lot of resources, which is wonderful. So I know exactly what I've got, where the best situation to use them is. And because I've created them, I know exactly that they're what I'm after in terms of they're fun, they're engaging, they're interactive, they're hands-on, things like that. So yes, it is a bit of an odd one, and it does take time, but I think as you progress and go along, it does become quicker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's kind of the point to leave with, really, isn't it, for those listening, is that you get better at gathering, at making resources as you go on. So if those first few sessions you find really tough and you find that it's taken you ages to find resources, that maybe not even the appropriate ones, you find that you can't use them in lesson, or the student's already done them, or that kind of thing, you will, the more sessions you do, the better you'll get at identifying which ones are useful, identifying which ones work for that student, which is a key one, and ultimately making your time more efficient, which is everyone's aim, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I think, is like most things in life and in tutoring. The more you do something, the better you become at it. And so initially, I guess even tutoring someone, I'm sure I made loads of mistakes in my first couple of sessions, but the more and more you do something, the better and better you become at it. And the more and more people tutor, or they look at it as a business and learn to do, I don't know, their accounts or their invoices or whatever it is, the more you do something, as we tell our students, the better you become at it.
Mm-hmm. That's a key point, isn't it? What we are teaching to our students, what we are trying to achieve ourselves, and I think if you're able to instill that in your own the way that you operate, then that will be much easier to transfer over to the students that you teach. And so finally, Sophie, just looking kind of back to those days pre your tutoring work, what did you think kind of being a tutor would be like before you became one?
This always makes me laugh because, and I think it's, I think part of me thinks it's awful to say it now, but I very much was guilty of not believing it was a proper job.
Okay.
I just knew so many tutors that did it part-time, either once they'd retired from teaching or they were on, I don't know, maternity leave. And I think tutors get a very bad rep. I think there are some very, and I'll be honest, I think there are some very bad tutors out there. Mm-hmm. People who literally do it for a bit of pocket money, probably don't declare anything, don't spend the time they should resort preparing the resources and all the rest of it, and just don't give us a bad name. But that is like, I guess, most things in life. Mm-hmm. And there are also some absolutely fabulous tutors out there. And I'm so fortunate that in my work as tutor, I've come across some incredible people. And it's really opened my eyes to the type of world and the type of career it can be if you want it to be. And so for me, I very much had this image that it wouldn't kind of be a proper thing, it might not work, but actually it is, and it's absolutely amazing. There are so many fab tutors out there who are happy to give advice, who are happy to talk to people, and can share their experiences, and they have totally changed my view of it. So yeah, I'm hugely grateful to all of them, which is in part, I guess, why I was more than happy to come on and speak about my experience, because I know so many people were happy to take time out and chat to me, that it was the least I could do.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe something that we here at QT are kind of looking to improve or build on, is this communication between tutors. As we've mentioned before, we often find that tutoring, as you may have as well yourself, Sophie, that tutoring can be quite isolated. Especially if you work a lot with online tutoring, you can sit at your desk and you can tutor however many hours a day that you tutor online, but it can often be a struggle to find people to bounce your ideas off, find people to share your experiences with, like you do with in the school staff room, where you're constantly talking to other teachers. So if nothing else, if we can just inspire people to open up about tutoring, open up about sharing what went well, what went wrong for them, and ultimately make tutors better prepared when they begin their tutoring sessions, then that will be a success. So thank you very, very much, Sophie, for coming on. Those answers there will be incredibly useful, I'm sure, to many people who are listening, many people who can access them. Sophie, thank you so much for coming on to join us. It's really
thank
really
you for having me. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, very, very good to hear those answers, and all the best of luck with Tutor In A Box, and I'm sure we'll be speaking again very, very soon.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you for listening. We'll see you next time. Goodbye. Thanks for listening to the Qualified Tutor podcast, where tutors share their expertise to support the tutoring community. We're always looking for motivated tutors to interview on the show. If you'd like to be part of the conversation, get in touch at podcast@qualifiedtutor.org. We'd love to learn from you.